Okay, so just make yourself comfortable and rubbing your hands together. Tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. One shoulder, your arm. Other side. Belly. Your legs. Sitting back, feeling your weight dropping in to the chair. In many ways, I think the hotter weather that we've been getting is the ideal sort of climate to learn Tai Chi in, because of the way that we try to move in Tai Chi, summed up in this phrase in the old Tai Chi writings of 4 ounces will overcome 1,000 pounds. And we find ways not to meet force with force as we habitually do, but to move with a greater economy, with less or a different type of effort, one that uses these 3 elements of body, mind and movement, body, mind and energy in harmony with each other, rather than straining against an overwhelming force. So in the hot weather, we naturally begin to move that way. We don't want to move as fast. We tend to move less in a way. So some of the qualities that the hot weather we've been having that are encouraged by the temperature are qualities we want to find in our practice. And it starts with this sinking back, letting yourself drop in to the chair, not holding a particular posture. Anywhere in your body, just finding a sort of natural pose. It enables you to let go of the urge to strain, to hold a particular position in a particular way. Breathing starting to come nice and smoothly. And as you've all heard me say before, as we do that and our body sort of seems to open up, we can have a sense of some of the heat that gets trapped in the body, some of the stagnant heat that's there, can actually start to be released. You may even want to use an image that I sometimes associate with our breathing, the in-breath having this fresh, sharp, clear quality, even on a hot day like this. We liken that to the spring mist. And the out-breath has the kind of murkier, more stagnant feel to it. That's the autumn fog. So just being aware of that breathing, that different quality of the breathing can have a refreshing quality as well. And bringing your feet in. So, you know, the weather we've been having can make it feel as though any effort is going to produce heat, is going to produce a straining, maybe even sweating or something like that. And yet we're told in Tai Chi that we shouldn't be doing that. So we can find different ways of moving, of supporting ourselves that spread the effort through the whole body and effectively lessen the effort on any one part of the body. It's very much the case in Tai Chi that our feet and our legs and our hips are going to carry the lion's share, because they're the bits that actually physically support the body in the upright stance. But our back as well is part of it. And all this sort of soft tissue, not just muscles and tendons, but really everything begins to work towards that goal, towards that aim, in the service of that quality of being able to move through a greater force like water. We often use that image of moving through water without the normal strain that we might experience. So with the quality of just softening, turning your head, and if you can feel the sort of brush of the air against your cheeks, for instance, it sounds a bit odd, I suppose, but can you just sort of like, in a way, relax in your face at that point? So it feels less as though there's a hard barrier between the skin and the air, more kind of slightly more diffuse quality about it. Shoulders. And then going forwards. And then hands down to your sides. And winding around. Back the other way. Rest your hands. Easing forwards, using your legs to push back. So this is a good example of what I was talking about, that way of moving. Our habitual way of bringing our head up would be to stiffen, to strain, to work hard in maybe our back, our shoulders, our neck. We might even put our head back a little bit to help with that. Might stiffen up in our belly, which would restrict our breathing and so on and so forth. But basically, it would all be about the upper part of the body and isolated parts of the body, straining here, stiffening up there, and so on and so forth. To come back to the upright here, there's a gentle push down through the legs, but even that is as a result of the compression of the legs, which then get compressed and then naturally begin to expand. That creates an upward movement that pushes against our shoulders. At the same time, as we've gone forwards, our hips have dropped back. So now we get a lengthening as we go forwards all the way through our back. And most of the tissue that lengthens is elastic. So there's a contraction all the way through between hips and shoulders. Every part of that contributes to the drawing up of your shoulders. You may notice that push up, expanding up through belly, solar plexus, and chest. And finally, we arrive at a point where we can maintain the posture simply by maintaining it, not by straining or stiffening up, but where we reach a balance between all the various directions of movement working through our body, forwards and backwards, left and right, up and down. So now we turn. Now this creates a slightly different quality because we are now generating, if you like, an imbalance. Rather than 50% of our weight going into each leg, it's a lot more on this leg. So we start to learn that actually here we often strain with like stiffening up, all the legs got to work harder, but actually it requires more softening to allow more compression. You don't have to create the compression. Gravity drawing your weight into your leg will do it for you. And so those parts of the body that I was talking about being expanded will now include the opposite side to the way that you're moving. So they expand more, so they'll contract more. And then you turn. And going around. Here too, we avoid stiffening, we avoid straining by making sure that however far our head goes, we can still feel the support of feet and hips. Rather than say, if I go right out here, now I'm stiffening up in that side, and that's going to generate heat. Go back the other way. Okay, and back to the center. Push one heel up, raise your toes, extend your leg. So Tai Chi carries with it this very different perspective. We want to try and avoid doing Tai Chi as though we were doing, I don't know, some exercise to music slowly, for instance. They're different disciplines. And whilst there is some crossover at times between Tai Chi and lots of other movement forms, the whole approach needs to be understood, just as it would be if you were doing one of those other disciplines. You wouldn't want to do aerobics like you do sped up Tai Chi, I suppose. And then on the other side. Okay. Hands down to your sides. Turning your hands. Bird folds its wings. You may be aware, because of the warmer weather, of areas that feel a bit stuck, a bit stagnant. The muscles and joints can swell up with the heat, for instance. Quite often, the cause is the heat, then a little bit of gentle movement in this way, particularly with that perspective on how we move, is a good way to release that pent up heat, to soften the swelling, reduce the swelling. But bear in mind that, that there may be these restrictions on the range of movement. So as always, one of the key things that we want to be aware of is what space is there to allow the movement. Not how far should I be moving. And whilst it's reasonable to have the goal that in the long term you're going to want to increase your range of movement, to increase that space for movement, today might not be the appropriate day to do that with. and then fisherman cast net. Next time, as your arms come up, change into pigeon spread its wings. So get your hands in front of your shoulders, turn your hands palm in, and draw back. Opening the chest and closing. It suits you when you come back here. Just see how it feels to take a nice deep in breath, that fresher quality. Breathe out when you're ready. Maybe come back to that idea every now and then, but don't try and maintain it the whole time. And then pushing a wave or pushing a bird. Quite an energetic image. Don't just use your arms or your shoulders or your back. Feel the movement coming up from below, from the transfer of your weight between your hips and your feet, and the springiness in your legs as they get compressed, and as you go back in your hips and lower back. Don't strain in your arms. Think of the big bones of your arms with the muscles kind of hanging from them in a way. So there needs to be space between bone and muscle. One more time. The hands are softly fisted, so you should be able to get a finger down through that middle space there, not gripping tight, which will tighten up your wrist and ultimately the rest of your arm. Once more. The end of the movement, opening your fingers, winding them back. Here we can begin to feel chest and upper back, very much as part of the whole movement. And then polishing the table using your hips and your lower back. And in the movement of your weight, of course. Good. Now coming in, turning your hands palm up. Feet and hips pushing down. So everything seems to retreat into the ground, into your hips, into your feet. Again, that same compression, beginning to push back up. And your spine, imagine your spine has been like a long spring. Here, the spring is pressed down, and then here, the spring releases and goes up. Try not to make this a struggle with the muscles of your arms, your shoulders. You're more likely to be able to reduce that strain as you become more aware of how the movement builds from the inside out. Again, your body expanding and contracting. Now change into the wild goose. And then parting the clouds, your hands dropping down. You come back, bringing your hands in towards your hips, and again you push up through your feet and your hips, through the upper body expanding. The expansion, pushing your arms away. Good. Yeah. Dragon plucks the stars from the sky. After this one, once again, I'm going to change. Again, pushing your hand up from underneath. The lengthening in the spine and then contraction. And then this time, as you push out sideways, just turn a little bit through your hips and your waist, so that having quite a big effect on your arms. But you haven't changed what you're doing with your arms. It's still very much the sideways push. The end of the 4-part sequence here. So the full set, pushing up. And then it's 3 lots of pushing sideways, but 2 of them also bring the turning in the center of our body into play. First in one direction, then the other. Finishing with facing the front and pushing out. Do one more round of this. As you finish, extending one foot, scooping the sea, looking at the sky. Here again, very aware of that feeling of pulling down through your lower back, hips. And then grasping the tiger's ears, coming back. Spinning out. Now we're going to switch to the other side. Scooping the sea, looking at the sky. So this is quite a strenuous exercise potentially. What we want to do is just to remind ourselves, for the mind to remind the body of how it can feel. And just let your body find a way of moving that encourages that cultivation. And grasping the tiger's ears. Okay, and then bring the feet back parallel. Turning your body from left to right and noticing the effect that has on the weight. Moving your weight a little bit then. And in fact, what we're looking for is a diagonal line, in a sense, from the center out to the side. Hands in front of you, and the image of carrying a tray of drinks is a good one. Notice how when you move forwards and turn, that turning affects your elbow, your wrists, your fingers. transfer that to both sides. So you come back, aiming most of the weight on one side, you move across, pushing up, hitting the ball in front of the shoulder, your arm gradually extending out and upwards. Do one more. And then cow gazes at the moon. Just open your arms out. Now they swing up a little bit further. My recommendation with this exercise, it's a bit of a stronger exercise, is that we first of all aim to gaze into the corners facing us. So if you've got a wall in front of you somewhere, sooner or later meet another wall, there'll be a corner in front either side. And see how that feels. And then if you feel as though you could create a bit of space for more movement, come across into your left. Again, that releasing feeling will sometimes just enable us to have more space to move into. And then just coming to rest. Just give yourself a few moments to reflect on this posture. And everything about it, your breathing, any sensation of movement. And in particular, if you can feel that natural support to feet, legs, hips and pelvis and your spine, then you are going a very long way towards doing these movements correctly, if you are. Okay, so now, once again, rubbing your hands together. Tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder, your arm. The other side. Upper part of your chest. Belly. Remember, let's start changing routine. Just going to your legs and pushing your legs up and down so the knees rising and falling. And then circling around in one direction. And back in the other. And then going back to the tapping. Good. And stand. So again, we want to bring these qualities of the 4 ounces moving 1,000 pounds into our standing. again, we often have this habitual habit of straining. But again, Tai Chi has a built-in way of moving as though through water. Could equally well say as though through high temperature, because I think unless we're driven in some way, we wouldn't naturally slow down, loosen up, perhaps kind of wear clothes. You know, we do all sorts of things quite naturally to adapt to the warmer conditions. So think about our posture and just letting your weight move forwards and backwards in your feet. This is unusual. We don't often think about our weight unless we think about it in terms of want to lose weight or put on weight, or we measure our weight. We don't see it in the same way we might see a muscle or a heart or even our blood or something like that as something that has a kind of existence. And what we're trying to do is to establish not only does it have this existence as part of our body, but it also has the ability to move. Our weight can either be back in our heels mostly, or it can be forwards, or at any point in between, of course. So just give yourself a few moments to reflect on that. We have weight, it's a factor in our posture, and we can move it. And then we look for that positioning of our weight that allows a kind of neutral position. A lot of what we learn to do in the chair, like being aware of the weight in that way, applies to when we're standing. One thing though that is different, we call this posture sitting. Now normally when we sit, if I go to sit back in the chair, it's reasonable to suppose that my hips will at some point find something to rest on, something solid. When we do it standing, actually that isn't there. Our lower back, our hips, our buttocks are sort of overhanging, and they're more above our ankles than they are above the middle of our feet. If I stiffen my knees up, I've now got a line, hips to knees to ankles. But I've also got pressure on my knees and ankles, and indeed on my hips. If I go to here, there's still the ankle there, but there's a space. There isn't a direct physical connection. If I had something like one of these shooter sticks, I think they're called, one of these chairs that are on poles that you can sit on, then there would be that connection there, but there isn't. So we have this feeling of our hips overhanging. We soften in the legs, and we feel a very strong feeling in the muscles of the legs, particularly the quadricep muscles at the front. And yet at the same time, we still feel the support, because if we've done this well, then we've enabled the pelvis to align itself, which sort of redirects the majority of the weight back into the feet. If the pelvis tilts, I just stand like this. If I tilt my pelvis in one direction, my weight is sent forwards, I fall over. If I tilt it in the other direction, eventually my weight is sent back. So a primary part of the body that is involved in adjusting where our weight is going to be our hips and our pelvis. And so although there's this slight feeling of our hips overhanging, the weight that goes through the hips is directed down through our legs. So we need to be able to just soften in the belly, in the lower back, and then just beginning to sink down, let your hips drop back and push up. So we want to maintain that ability of our pelvis to redirect the weight. We don't want our weight to go anywhere other than in our feet, and ideally focused on that part of the foot that we felt the weight in when we were in that neutral position. We don't want to hold our back tight, that we often do. We don't want to hold our belly tight. And so just see if you can feel, put one hand here on your back, see if you can feel the movements in the muscles there. And on your belly. So lots of habits of standing and the way that we stand, we pull the belly in and so on and so forth, will actually get in the way of this. We just have to recognize that. It's a slow process of releasing those habits. And then put your hands on your hips, and you may even just feel the adjustment of the pelvis. It's quite automatic. We don't have to make it happen. In fact, we can't really. It's a very subtle movement. It's an automatic movement. It's one that our body will do anyway and knows how to do. Although some of the ability to maintain that can actually be quite difficult. But of course, if we practice this way, then we will actually begin to get to a point where we're recovering some of that ability. Now bring your hands around in front of you, pushing up. And sinking down, just doing these three movements in a little sequence, bringing your hands out. And then parting the crown. Feeling the change from one movement to another. And this is also quite useful to note this, because quite often a movement can look quite different until we start to practice like this. And actually it doesn't necessarily take a big change. And there's a couple of little things going on, but focus on that feeling within your body of expansion and contraction. Initially, the movements of our arms guide us into that awareness. You could argue that the arms moving in a particular way have a particular effect on different parts of the body. Just concentrating on your torso. Legs are still doing the same thing for each exercise. And then just focusing on the differences here. Feel the expansion in your belly, lower back. As you start the wild goose, that's where you feel, but it moves up into your solar plexus, pushing your elbows out, and that draws your arms out. Same thing here, belly, solar plexus, but then up into the upper part of your chest, which pushes the arms up and out even further. There's a slight change in shape. The role of your arm really is to express different shapes. But the impetus gradually shifts so that what we were led into by our arms, if you like, think of it like that, gradually becomes the dominant feature, so that to produce rooting down, the first exercise, we focus on the expansion in the belly and the lower back, and on just a particular choreography, the shape of the arm. Now from here, we're going to expand in the belly, then in the solar plexus, and the choreography is the wild goose, the bird in flight. And then here, belly, solar plexus, and upper part of the chest. And the expression of that is through the movement part in the clouds. So we've changed our perspective from one where we produce the movement, if you like, externally, and that leads us to an internal awareness to taking that internal awareness and encouraging a change, a movement internally, leading to an external change. There are lots of variations. So, you know, we're not stuck in necessarily these three movements. So, for instance, the last movement, parting the clouds, involves an expansion, as I said, belly, solar plexus up into the chest. But now we're going to change into dragon plucks the stars from the sky. And we have the same expansion on one side of the body, in the belly, solar plexus, and chest. But the expression of that is through a different movement. That order of expansion is fairly constant in Tai Chi. We work from the ground upwards in lots of different ways. So, you know, what's below influences what's above. That's not to say that there isn't a two-way process there, but in terms of producing the movement, producing the power to move with, the energy to move with, it will work in that way. And then we think, well, okay, so it works in that way, but it's also the sinking down that loads the legs. Remember, they're springy to produce the upward movement. So you can take it back a stage. Good. And then just shake out. It's also worth noting that that pattern of expansion, belly, solar plexus, upper part of the chest, is the same pattern of expansion that we would like to be able to do when we're doing the breathing with or without the movement. That slightly deeper abdominal bellows breathing. Now put one foot forwards, and again we move from the ground. You could almost imagine that when we were standing in the parallel stance, pushing up, it's like a wave, like water rising up from the legs. And in the same way, this now becomes a wave that starts in the foot and pushes us forwards, and then we drop down into the front foot. So there's a continuity there. And because we're starting at the bottom and it's moving up, we're beginning to engage the whole body. If we move the other way, if we went like this, now there's a tremendous onus on my shoulders and my back. There's a lot of effort being put into not falling over. In some circumstances, I mean, I know that we could just do that and swing forwards, what we do in ordinary walking. But this really emphasizes that movement from the ground. Raising your toes and your heel. And stepping in. On the other side. That moment of halting is a moment of sinking, of settling. And you know, if I exaggerate that, normally you wouldn't get a kind of physical dropping, but you would feel again a sense of your hips with a space below them and dropping into that space. But if I had a ball, if I was sitting on a ball and I actually physically dropped, you could see my knees would get pushed outwards. So the feeling of sinking down produces an outward energy. Step in. and take a few steps through. And change direction. So right foot forwards, fisherman cast the net. As you stop and settle into the front foot, remember there's still that impetus, that movement, that momentum, pushing your arms forwards. Sink back and turn. As you sink into your back foot, again, there's that expansion sideways. And the arms will naturally move in a circle because they're attached to your shoulders. Remember, we don't want the arms to overextend. We don't want any sense of stiffening. We don't want to have to make that kind of effort, particularly when it's warmer. Imagine, moving in the difference between moving in in long, sort of long flowing clothes and very tight clothes in this weather. It's more like the flowing quality that we're looking for here. So here is fine. Here, everything's tightening up. Good. And then the other foot forwards, fisherman casting there. And then sinking back. And when you sink down, you release in your hip, you get the outward movement, and that also helps us when we come to take the step. Releasing the hip, feel that sense of your hip dropping into the space below it. And then going back. And then bring your feet back. Shake that. Good. Find your chair again. So 4 ounces will move 1,000 pounds, is what we say in Tai Chi. it's not a lack of effort, it's a very different type of effort. So as I say, this hot weather encourages to move in a way that is very akin to Tai Chi, I think. So settling back down into your chair, feel the support from your hips, from your feet, from the chair, from inside your back. So there's as much of a release of tightness and stiffness, a kind of opening up of the body as possible. Let your hands drop down, and then embrace tiger, return to mountain. One more time. And rest. Lovely. Thank you very much, everybody. So you can practice moving like Tai Chi